Chapter 1. The Shattered Dream. Leon never imagined his life would unravel like this. 1 month before the wedding, his world crumbled. The air in their apartment had been thick with an unspoken tension for weeks, but Leon had chalked it up to stress. Cold feet, maybe, or just the weight of wedding planning. He had ignored the late nights, the quiet phone calls in another room, the way his fiancé, Nathan, had begun pulling away, his touch growing distant, his kisses feeling like an obligation rather than something shared between two lovers. Then, on a crisp evening in late autumn, the truth came crashing down. "I can't do this," Nathan had said, voice flat, void of the love that once made Leon's heart soar. "I don't love you the way I should." The words had been a blade, cutting deep, but the next ones had shattered him completely. "There's someone else. I never really got over him." Him, his ex. Leon had barely processed the confession before Nathan was already packing his things, moving as though he had rehearsed this 100 times in his head. Like he had been waiting for the right moment to leave. Leon had stood there, frozen, his entire body numb. He wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to beg for a different outcome. But the part of him that had always been afraid of being abandoned, the part of him that had spent years convincing himself he was worthy of love, knew that no amount of pleading would change Nathan's mind. So he said nothing. Nathan had left that night, and Leanne had crumbled. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of grief. Leon barely left the apartment. He barely ate. He didn't answer messages or calls from his friends. He knew they were worried. His best friend had even shown up at his door with groceries and tearful words of comfort, but Leon couldn't bring himself to let her in. He felt pathetic, drowning in heartbreak while Nathan had already moved on. Nights were the worst. He would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. Every kiss, every whispered promise, every touch that now felt like a cruel lie. When exhaustion finally pulled him under, his dreams were filled with shadows of what could have been, only for him to wake to the suffocating reality of what was. One night he woke up gasping, his chest so tight with grief that he thought his heart might actually break apart. Tears burned his eyes as he curled up in the empty bed, sobbing into the sheets that still smelled like Nathan. It was humiliating how much it still hurt. Even worse was how, in his weakest moments, he still reached for his phone, searching for Nathan's name like an addict craving poison. And then, the final blow. The day of the wedding arrived. Leon sat in his apartment, the air still and suffocating, staring at the suit he had picked out months ago. He had imagined this day 1,000 times, walking down the aisle, promising forever, looking into Nathan's eyes and seeing love staring back at him. Instead, he opened social media, and there they were, Nathan and his ex, together, smiling, happy. Leon felt something inside him shatter. It wasn't just the fact that Nathan had moved on, it was how easily he had done it. There had been no hesitation, no mourning, no sign that Leon had ever mattered to him at all. Leon stared at the screen, his breathing shallow, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through picture after picture. Nathan, laughing in a cozy cafe. Nathan, holding his ex's hand. Nathan, already building a new life, one that no longer included Leon. The pain was unbearable. A storm raged inside him, emotions twisting and clashing until all he could feel was an overwhelming sense of loss. He had given Nathan everything, his love, his time, his heart, and in return he had been discarded like nothing more than a passing phase. A sob built in his throat, but he swallowed it down. Then, suddenly, impulsively, he stood up. He couldn't stay here. Not in this apartment, not in this city, not anywhere that reminded him of what he had lost. His eyes flickered to the honeymoon itinerary still pinned to the fridge. A luxury beachside resort. A week of paradise. He had planned it meticulously, envisioning days spent wrapped in Nathan's arms, nights filled with whispered promises by the ocean. It was supposed to be their beginning. Now, it felt like the only escape he had left. Without thinking, he grabbed his suitcase. Hours later, Leon sat in the back of a taxi, watching the city blur past through rain-streaked windows. His chest ached, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't from staying still, it was from moving forward. He had no idea what awaited him at that resort. But right now, all he knew was this. He couldn't spend another second mourning a future that was never meant to be. So he would go alone. And maybe, just maybe, he would find a way to heal. Chapter 2, A Ghost from the Past. The resort was beautiful, cruelly beautiful, Leon thought. The kind of place that whispered promises of romance, of slow kisses in the sunset, of love blooming under moonlit waves, a paradise built for couples, for honeymooners. And yet, here he was. Alone. The sleek black car pulled up to the entrance, and Lon swallowed the lump in his throat as a valet opened the door for him. He stepped out, the warm coastal breeze curling around him, carrying the scent of the ocean and hibiscus. He had dreamed about this moment before, the arrival, the excitement, the promise of an unforgettable trip. But not like this. Dragging his suitcase behind him, he stepped inside the grand lobby, where the ceiling stretched high, framed by glass walls that revealed a breathtaking view of the turquoise sea. Lush greenery spilled over balconies, the sound of trickling fountains mixing with the soft, classical music playing overhead. Everything was perfect. And it felt like a slap in the face. He shouldn't have come. Everywhere he looked, there were couples, holding hands, stealing kisses, whispering sweet nothings. Leon clenched his jaw and forced himself toward the check-in desk. A young receptionist greeted him with a bright, professional smile. "Welcome to Coral Bay Resort, mister." She glanced at her screen, but before she could finish, another voice cut in. "I'll take care of this." Leon's gaze snapped toward the source, and then his breath caught in his throat. Standing behind the desk, dressed in a crisp white button-up with the resort's logo embroidered on the pocket, was someone familiar. Dark wavy hair, slightly tousled from the breeze drifting in through the open doors. Sharp blue-green eyes that seemed to hold the depth of the ocean itself. A strong, lean frame, effortlessly poised with an air of quiet confidence. Leon knew him. But the name, why couldn't he place the name? And then it clicked. Tanner. From high school. A distant memory surfaced. Hallways lined with lockers, the scent of old textbooks, the quiet boy who always sat 2 rows behind him in history class. They were never exactly friends, but they had spoken a few times, shared a few passing conversations. And now here he was, standing in front of him like a ghost from another life. Tanner, however, looked as if he had seen a ghost too. Leon furrowed his brows at the way Tanner's fingers curled slightly at his sides, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. Why was he looking at him like that? Tanner blinked, regaining his composure, his lips curved into an easy practice smile. "Leon, right? It's been a long time." Leon hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, wow. I didn't expect to run into anyone from high school here." His voice came out hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in days. Tanner let out a small chuckle, though something about it felt strained. "Yeah, same here," he said, "but life is funny that way." Funny. Leon could think of many words to describe his life right now, and funny wasn't one of them. There was a pause. Not quite uncomfortable, but heavy. Leon didn't notice the way Tanner's grip tightened slightly on the desk. He didn't see the way Tanner's gaze softened. Not just with recognition, but something else entirely. Because Tanner remembered everything. Every detail about Leon from high school. The way he used to drum his fingers on his desk when he was lost in thought. The way he laughed a little too loudly when something truly amused him. The way his hazel eyes turned golden in the sunlight. And Tanner had been in love with him. Silently, from afar. Back then it had been impossible. His family, strict, traditional, suffocating, had made sure of that. So he had buried it, watched from a distance, and regretted it ever since. But now, fate had placed Leon right in front of him again, and he was alone. Tanner's heart clenched at the realization, his eyes flickering briefly to the reservation on the screen. Honeymoon suite, 1 guest. His stomach twisted. Leon had been supposed to be here with someone, but he wasn't. Tanner knew better than to ask. Instead, he forced himself back into professionalism. "Well," he said, keeping his tone light, "I'd be happy to make your stay as comfortable as possible. Let's get you checked in." Leon nodded, rubbing at his temple as if exhausted. He looked so tired. Tanner wished he could ask what had happened. Wished he could reach across the desk, touch his hand, tell him he wasn't alone. Instead, he cleared his throat and focused on the computer screen. "You have a private villa by the ocean. It's one of the best views in the resort. Leon let out a humorless laugh. That's nice. Tanner hesitated, then slid the keycard across the desk. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Leon took the card, and for the first time, he really looked at Tanner. You're the manager here? Tanner nodded. Yeah, been here a few years now. Leon hummed, staring at him for a beat too long. It's nice seeing a familiar face. You have no idea. Tanner smiled. Yeah, you too. Leon gave him a small nod, then picked up his suitcase and turned toward the elevators. Tanner watched him go, something heavy settling in his chest. This was his chance. A second chance, to be close to the one person he had never stopped thinking about. But first, he had to be careful. Leon was hurting. He was fragile. And Tanner would not be another person to hurt him. So he watched him disappear into the elevator. And silently, he promised himself something. He would do whatever it took to help Leon heal. Chapter 3 Years and Tides. The ocean was restless that night. Waves rolled in and out, each one whispering against the shore, pulling back only to return again, a never-ending cycle of retreat and return. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the water, making the sand shimmer where it was wet. The breeze carried the scent of salt and something bittersweet, something aching. Lion sat near the shoreline, his knees pulled up to his chest, arms wrapped tightly around himself, as if trying to hold the broken pieces of himself together. But they kept slipping through his fingers. A deep, shuddering breath left him, his body trembling as he stared at the dark waves. His eyes burned, but he couldn't tell if it was from the wind or the tears that refused to stop. Why does it still hurt this much? Nathan had been gone for a month now, a whole month. Shouldn't the pain have dulled by now? Shouldn't he have gotten used to the empty space beside him? But the truth was, the loneliness felt even sharper here, on what was supposed to be his honeymoon. Leon squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his forehead against his knees, trying to breathe through it. But grief was an ocean of its own, and right now he was drowning. He was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't notice the footsteps approaching. Not until a voice broke through the quiet. You know, they say the ocean is terrible at keeping secrets. Leon's head jerked up. Standing a few feet away, hands tucked into his pockets, was Tanner. The dim glow of the resort's lights reached just enough to outline his tall frame, his dark hair tousled by the wind. His sharp blue-green eyes held something unreadable, something quiet and steady, like he knew exactly why Leon was here. Leon quickly wiped at his damp cheeks, looking away. What? His voice came out hoarse. Tanner stepped closer, but not too close, giving him space. The ocean, he repeated, nodding towards the waves. It hears everything. People come here and tell it their worst thoughts, their deepest regrets, but does it ever keep them? No. He smirked slightly. It just throws them back out. Leon blinked at him, thrown off by the randomness of it. Then, despite himself, despite the weight in his chest, he let out a quiet, breathy laugh. It wasn't much, but it was something. Tanner noticed. You're really bad at this, Leon muttered, shaking his head. At what? Comforting people. Tanner smirked. That's because I'm not trying to comfort you. Leon gave him a dry look, and Tanner shrugged. I figured you probably don't want someone telling you everything's going to be okay, that you'll heal with time, or whatever other cliché people like to say when they don't know what else to say. Leon exhaled, looking back at the waves. I really don't. Thought so. Tanner hesitated, then added, but for what it's worth, I do think the ocean trick works. If you let it. Leon arched a brow. You've done it before? Tanner gave a small chuckle, glancing at the water. More than once. A silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, not heavy, just there. Then, without asking, Tanner settled down in the sand beside him. Not too close, not too far. And to his own surprise, Leon didn't mind. For a while, neither of them spoke. The wind hummed between them, carrying the sound of distant laughter from the resort, where people were still enjoying the night. Couples dancing under fairy lights, sipping expensive cocktails, making memories that would last a lifetime. Leon used to think that was supposed to be him. But now, sitting here in the quiet, with the only company being someone from a past he barely remembered, he wondered if maybe this moment, this strange, unexpected moment, was exactly what he needed. Tanner's voice was softer when he spoke next. You know, you don't have to tell me what happened. But if you ever want to talk, I'll listen. Lian hesitated. He should have brushed him off. Should have said he was fine, that it didn't matter, that he just wanted to be left alone. But Tanner didn't push. He didn't pity him. And maybe that's why Lian found himself saying the words before he could stop them. I was supposed to be here with someone. Tanner didn't react. He just waited. My fiancé, Lian continued, staring at the waves. Or ex-fiancé, I guess. We were supposed to get married today. Tanner inhaled sharply. If Lian had been looking, he would have seen the way Tanner's fingers curled slightly into the sand. But he wasn't looking. He was too busy fighting the fresh wave of emotion threatening to crash over him. Lian shook his head, voice thick. He left me, for his ex. There. He had said it out loud. And somehow, the words made it feel even more real. The pain surged again, raw and unrelenting, and his breath hitched before he could stop it. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes, trying to will away the burning. Then, a quiet clink. Lian lowered his hands, blinking in confusion as Tanner extended a glass towards him. Lian looked at it, then back at him. Tanner offered a small smile. Figured you could use a drink. Lian hesitated for half a second before taking it. The first sip burned its way down his throat, the warmth settling in his chest like something solid. He exhaled. You always keep drinks on you? Tanner smirked. Perks of being the manager, unlimited access to the bar. Lian let out a weak laugh. You might be my favorite hotel manager ever. Tanner placed a hand over his heart in mock honor. I'll cherish that title forever. Lian shook his head, but the heaviness in his chest had eased, just a little. For a while, they just sat there, passing the glass back and forth in comfortable silence. The waves kept moving. The wind kept blowing. Lian didn't know why, but with Tanner sitting beside him, the pain felt a little less unbearable. Tanner, on the other hand, watched Lian from the corner of his eye, watched the way the moonlight caught in his tired hazel eyes, how his fingers curled slightly in the sand, as if grounding himself. And in that moment, Tanner made a quiet promise to himself. He wouldn't push, wouldn't force anything, but he would be here, for as long as Lian needed, even if it meant keeping his own feelings buried. Chapter 4. Little Moments of Healing. The next morning, Lian woke to sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains, casting soft, golden patterns across the bed. For a moment, disoriented from sleep, he almost forgot where he was. But then reality settled in like a weight on his chest. Not home. Not with Nathan. Alone. He swallowed hard and dragged himself out of bed. He had barely slept, the exhaustion deep in his bones, but staying in bed all day wasn't an option. Not unless he wanted to drown in his own thoughts again. So he showered, dressed, and made his way to the resort's dining area. The breakfast terrace was beautiful. Open air overlooking the sea, with crisp white tablecloths and elegantly arranged platters of fresh fruit, pastries, and steaming cups of coffee. Lian slid into a seat near the railing, absent-mindedly watching the waves. He had no appetite, but eating was necessary, he supposed. He forced himself to pick at a plate of food, though everything tasted like paper. Then a waiter approached, setting a small plate in front of him. Lian blinked. A delicate golden-brown pastry sat on the dish, dusted with powdered sugar and filled with something creamy. I didn't order this, he said, glancing up. The waiter smiled knowingly. It was sent to you. Lian frowned. By who? Instead of answering, the waiter placed a small note beside the plate and walked away. Curious, Lian picked up the folded paper, his brow furrowing. Sweet things make bad days bearable. A wise bartender. Lian let out a soft breath of surprise. Tanner. He glanced around the terrace, but there was no sign of him. The pastry sat untouched for a long moment before Lian sighed and picked it up. And to his surprise, it was good. Really good. For the first time in what felt like weeks, something other than grief settled in his chest. Something lighter. Later that day, Lian wandered through the resort aimlessly, his mind still heavy but not as suffocating as before. That's when he saw him. Tanner stood by the main pool area, speaking with a staff member, looking effortlessly composed in his usual white button-up, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Lian hesitated, unsure if he should approach. But before he could make a decision, Tanner glanced up and met his gaze. A flicker of something unreadable passed through those blue-green eyes, but then Tanner smirked. You survived breakfast, I see. Leon snorted. Barely. Tanner tilted his head, studying him. Then, so casually it almost didn't register, he said, "I'm heading out to the marina in a bit. Want to come?" Leon blinked. "The marina?" "Boat ride," Tanner said. "A little island a few miles out. Great views." Leon hesitated. His first instinct was to say no, to curl back into his shell, to let the weight of his sadness keep him anchored. But then he thought about the past month, the isolation, the emptiness, and then he thought about the small, unexpected warmth of that pastry this morning. "Fine," he muttered, "but only if you promise not to drown me." Tanner's lips twitched. No promises. The boat ride was nice. The sea breeze ruffled Leon's hair, the rhythmic rocking of the boat oddly soothing. Tanner handled the boat effortlessly, navigating the open water with a quiet confidence that Leon couldn't help but admire. For a while, they didn't talk. And that was okay. Leon let himself just exist, watching the sky shift from pale blue to the soft hues of late afternoon. It was the first time in weeks he hadn't felt like he was suffocating. Over the next few days, Tanner continued his subtle mission of distracting Leon from his own pain. A cooking class, where Leon ended up ruining a simple dish because he got distracted arguing with Tanner about proper seasoning. A visit to a hidden cove, where the water was so clear Leon could see fish darting between the rocks. At first, Leon had resisted, had found excuses to stay inside, to wallow in the familiar comfort of grief. But Tanner never pushed, never forced him into anything. He simply extended the offer, and waited. And slowly, Leon started saying yes. One night, they sat on the terrace bar, watching the sky turn deep violet as the sun dipped below the horizon. Leon swirled his drink absently, his fingers tracing the rim of the glass. "I still check my phone, you know." Tanner glanced at him. Leon let out a hollow laugh. "Like an idiot. I still go online and I see them, happy. Moving on like I never even mattered." Tanner's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell Leon that Nathan was an idiot, that he was a fool for letting someone like Leon go, but he didn't, because Leon didn't need pretty words right now. Instead, Tanner simply said, "That's not on you." Leon scoffed. "Yeah, feels like it is." Tanner exhaled, taking a sip of his drink before leaning back slightly. "You ever seen a broken watch?" Leon blinked. "What?" Tanner turned his glass absently. "Sometimes a watch stops working. The gears get jammed, the hands freeze, time just stops. And no matter how much you shake it, no matter how much you wish it worked, it won't move forward." Leon frowned. "What does this have to do with—" "Sometimes love is like that," Tanner said simply. "You can give it everything, try to fix it, but if it's broken, it's broken." Leon fell silent. Tanner set his glass down. "But you're not broken." Leon's fingers curled slightly around his drink. He didn't know why, but something about that statement settled deep inside him, like a truth he wasn't ready to believe yet. But maybe, one day. That night, as Leon lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he realized something. For the first time since Nathan left, he didn't cry himself to sleep. Chapter 5. The Ghosts We Carry. The night was too quiet, and that was dangerous. Leon sat curled on the plush chair in his villa, the dim glow of his phone screen illuminating his face in the darkness. He knew he shouldn't be doing this. Knew it was self-sabotage. But the temptation was always there, lurking just beneath the surface like a wound that refused to heal. His thumb hovered over Nathan's profile for a long moment. Then, despite every rational part of his brain screaming at him, he tapped it, and instantly, regret sank its claws into his chest. There they were. Nathan and his ex. A picture from earlier that day, Nathan smiling, his arm wrapped around the man he had left Leon for, the caption underneath reading, "Sometimes love leads you back where you were always meant to be." Leon felt like he had been punched in the stomach. His breath caught, and a sharp ache spread through his ribs, up his throat. His fingers curled around the phone, knuckles white. How could he move on so fast? How could he act like Leon had been nothing? Before he even realized it, a choked sound escaped him. His vision blurred, his chest tightening until he was struggling to breathe. He pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead, willing the burning in his eyes to stop. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that Nathan got to be happy while Leon was still stuck here, drowning in the wreckage. A sharp knock on the door made him flinch. "Lion." Tanner. Lion didn't answer. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to compose himself, but the door opened anyway, and Tanner stepped inside. He took one look at Lion, the phone in his trembling hands, the heartbreak written all over his face, and Tanner understood. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he crossed the room in 3 strides, then plucked the phone straight out of Leon's hands. Leon blinked in stunned confusion as Tanner calmly pressed the power button and turned it off. "Tanner, what the hell?" Tanner tossed the phone onto the nearby table and then met Leon's gaze, his voice low but firm. "You're here. Now. Don't let someone who doesn't love you steal any more of your time." Leon's breath hitched. The words hit him like a tidal wave, knocking the air from his lungs. Because deep down he knew, Tanner was right. Nathan had made his choice. Nathan had walked away. And yet, here Leon was, still holding on to something that was never going to come back. His throat burned. Something inside him crumbling under the weight of it all. His hands trembled, his chest rising and falling too fast. Then Tanner did something unexpected. He sat down beside him. Not close enough to overwhelm, but close enough that Leon could feel his warmth. Close enough that for the first time in weeks, Lion didn't feel completely alone. Lion let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. Why are you even doing this?" Tanner was quiet for a moment. Then finally, "Because I know what it's like to love someone from a distance." Lion's gaze snapped to him. "What?" Tanner hesitated, fingers curling slightly against his knee. Lion waited. And then, in a voice softer than before, Tanner admitted, "In high school, there was someone I cared about, but I never told them, never got close. And when I finally had the courage, it was too late." Lion frowned, his chest tightening in a different way now. He had never known Tanner well back then, never noticed if he had been in love with someone. But hearing this, seeing the raw honesty in Tanner's eyes, it made something shift inside him. Before he could respond, a sharp clap of thunder rumbled in the distance. Leon startled, glancing toward the open balcony doors. The wind had picked up, the scent of rain thick in the air. A storm was rolling in. Tanner smirked, standing. Perfect timing. Leon arched a brow. For what? Instead of answering, Tanner grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the door. Leon instinctively resisted. "Tanner, come on." Tanner's grip was gentle but firm. "Trust me." And for some reason, Leon did. The rain hit them all at once. Cool and heavy, the first droplets landed like soft kisses against their skin before turning into a full-on downpour. The wind howled through the palm trees, and Leon should have been running for shelter. But instead, Tanner laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that was utterly contagious. "You're insane," Leon shouted over the sound of the rain, his wet clothes sticking to him. Tanner grinned. "Maybe." Then, before Leon could process what was happening, Tanner grabbed his hand. And suddenly, they were moving. Tanner spun him in a ridiculous, offbeat dance, twirling him through the rain, feet sinking into the sand. At first, Leon resisted, his instinct to stay guarded kicking in. But Tanner didn't let go, just held on to him, guiding him through a dance that had no rhythm, no rules. And somehow, Leon started laughing. A real, unrestrained laugh that shook through him. For the first time in so long, something light and free bloomed in his chest. They stumbled, their movements clumsy, but neither of them cared. The rain soaked them to the bone, their hair plastered to their foreheads, but it didn't matter. Because for the first time in weeks, Leon wasn't thinking about Nathan. He wasn't thinking about the past. He was just here. With Tanner. When they finally stopped, both of them breathless, Leon felt his pulse hammering. His eyes met Tanner's, and for a brief, fleeting second, the world stilled. Tanner's gaze flickered to Lion's lips, then back up. The air between them was charged, the storm raging around them, but the only thing Lion could focus on was Tanner. Something shifted inside him. Something new. He didn't know what it meant yet, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to find out. Chapter 6. A Love That's Always Been There. The rain had stopped by the time they made their way back to Leon's villa. Everything smelled of earth and salt, the damp air clinging to their skin, their clothes still soaked from the storm. The resort was quiet now, the nightlife winding down, leaving only the distant sound of waves lapping against the shore. Leon felt different. Lighter, somehow. He wasn't sure if it was the reckless dance in the rain, the way his laughter had spilled out before he could stop it, or Tanner's hand in his. Whatever it was, it left his heart racing. Tanner followed him inside, shaking water from his hair before running a hand through it. Well, that was either the best idea I've ever had or the dumbest. Jury's still out. Leon snorted, kicking off his shoes. You're definitely insane. Maybe, Tanner admitted, a small smirk playing at his lips. Then his gaze softened as he looked at Leon. Really looked at him. Leon hesitated, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. Something shifted between them. A weight, heavy, unspoken, settled in the space between their breaths. Tanner exhaled, dragging a hand down his face, almost as if debating something. Then, finally, he said, I need to tell you something. Leon's brows furrowed. Okay. Tanner hesitated, his fingers flexing at his sides, his throat working around words he wasn't sure he should say. But then he looked at Lion. The way the dim light caught in his still damp hair, the way his hazel eyes flickered with curiosity, with something fragile but strong all at once, and he knew he couldn't hold it in anymore. So Tanner stepped forward, slowly. Like a man walking a line he could never cross back over. When I said I knew what it was like to love someone from a distance, he started, voice low, steady, I didn't mean just anyone. Lion's breath caught. Tanner held his gaze unwavering. I meant you. Silence crashed over them, thick and charged. Leon blinked, his lips parting slightly, but no words came. Tanner exhaled, glancing away for a second before looking back. Back in high school, I liked you. A lot more than I should have, more than you ever knew. His voice softened. I never told you. I couldn't. Leon's heart slammed against his ribs. You, he swallowed, trying to piece together thoughts that had suddenly unraveled. You had feelings for me? Back then? Tanner gave a small, almost self-deprecating smile. I spent 2 years watching you from the back of the classroom, memorizing the way you laughed, the way you tapped your pen against the desk when you were bored, the way you always looked out for people, even when they didn't deserve it. His jaw clenched slightly. But I never said a damn thing, because back then I was too much of a coward. Leon just stared at him. His pulse roared in his ears, his body frozen between disbelief and something else, something unfamiliar but warm. Tanner sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I buried it, told myself it didn't matter, that it was just some stupid crush that would go away. He let out a quiet laugh, but it didn't, and when I saw you again, here, like this. His gaze flickered over Leon's face, something raw flashing behind his eyes. I knew I was never really over it. Leon's fingers curled slightly at his sides. He wanted to say something, anything, but his throat had closed up. Tanner let out a slow breath, his voice quieter now. I'm not telling you this because I expect anything. I needed you to know, because if I don't say it now, I might never get the chance again. Leon's heart pounded. His mind raced to piece everything together, but his emotions were tangled, a mess of confusion, disbelief, and something deep and unspoken pressing against his ribs. How had he never noticed? How had he gone through high school so completely unaware that Tanner, had been carrying this weight, this secret? Leon ran a shaky hand through his damp hair. I don't know what to say. Tanner gave a small, lopsided smile, like he had expected that. You don't have to say anything. But Leon wanted to say something. He just didn't know what. His mind felt like static, buzzing with memories of high school, trying to remember if there had ever been signs. Had there been a look, a lingering glance, a moment where he should have known? But nothing came. And maybe that was what unsettled him the most, because all this time he thought he had been alone in his heartbreak, in longing for something real, in feeling like he had never been someone's first choice. But Tanner had been there, watching, wanting, carrying something Leon had never even noticed. His stomach twisted. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Leon admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Tanner nodded, his expression unreadable. I know, Leon swallowed. I don't even know what this is. Tanner studied him for a long moment before speaking again. It doesn't have to be anything. Not if you don't want it to be. Leon exhaled, closing his eyes for a second before opening them again. I feel like I'm still picking up the pieces of myself, and now you're telling me that He stopped, shaking his head. I don't want to hurt you. Tanner's lips parted slightly, something flickering in his gaze. Then, instead of looking hurt, he softened. "You won't," Tanner said gently. "That's not what this is." Lian hesitated. "Then what is this?" Tanner's jaw worked for a moment, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. Then, slowly, he stepped closer, not closing the distance entirely, but near enough that Lian could feel his presence, his warmth. "This is me caring about you," Tanner said, without expecting anything in return. Lian's breath hitched. Something in those words unraveled him. Because he had spent so long thinking love was conditional, that it was something that could be taken away the second you weren't good enough. But Tanner was saying he cared, without conditions, without expectations. Lian's throat tightened and he looked away, staring at the floor. He didn't deserve this. Not after everything. Not when his heart was still bruised and healing. But Tanner didn't push. He just waited. And somehow, that made all the difference. The tension in the air didn't fade, but it shifted, no longer overwhelming, no longer suffocating. Instead, it settled into something quieter, softer. They moved around each other naturally after that. Tanner didn't bring it up again, and Lian didn't push him away. Instead, they just existed. Tanner made tea while Lian dried his hair. Lian found a sweatshirt and tossed one to Tanner, since they were both still damp from the rain. And when Tanner finally settled onto the couch, looking comfortable, Lian found himself hesitating. The bed was right there. But he swallowed, his fingers twitching slightly. "You can stay." Tanner glanced up at him. "You sure?" Lian nodded. Tanner studied him for a second longer, as if making sure he meant it. Then, without another word, he scooted over, making room. Lian sat beside him, a little stiff at first, but then Tanner shifted, casually, comfortably, like he had done this 1,000 times before. And somehow, Lian's body relaxed. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The only sound was the faint hum of the ocean outside, the occasional rustle of fabric as they shifted, and the steady, comforting presence of someone who wasn't asking for more than Lian could give. Lian let out a slow breath. For the first time in what felt like forever, his heart wasn't aching. For the first time in weeks, he slept peacefully. Chapter 7. Choosing Love Again. The reality of departure settled into Lian's chest like a slow, creeping ache. It had been lingering in the back of his mind for days now. The quiet, inevitable fact that this wasn't his home, that this wasn't permanent, that his time here, with Tanner, was running out. But now, staring at his suitcase packed neatly by the door, it felt real in a way that stole the breath from his lungs. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped between his knees, staring at nothing. There was something inside him twisting, tightening, resisting. He didn't want to leave, and that realization scared him more than anything else. Because if he stayed, what then? What if this was just another illusion? What if he let himself believe in love again, only to have it fall apart? What if Tanner woke up one day and realized that Lian wasn't worth choosing after all? A soft knock pulled him from his spiraling thoughts. Tanner stood in the doorway, casual, composed, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet understanding. "You all set?" Tanner asked, nodding toward the suitcase. Lian swallowed hard. "Yeah." Tanner hesitated, then stepped inside. "Your flight's in a few hours." Lian nodded. There was a pause, a moment stretching between them, thick and unspoken. Then Tanner exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair before stepping closer, stopping just short of touching distance. "You don't owe me anything, Lian," he said softly. "And I'm not going to ask you to stay." Lian's breath hitched. Tanner's gaze was steady, unwavering. "But I need you to know something before you go." Lian swallowed. "What?" Tanner's lips twitched, but the warmth in his expression was laced with something heavier. "You deserve a love that doesn't make you question your worth." Lian's chest ached. Because Tanner meant it. He always had. Unlike Nathan, Tanner wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't making promises he couldn't keep. He was simply offering. Lian didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. And Tanner, true to his word, let him choose. The airport was loud, busy, suffocating. Lian sat at the gate, staring at the boarding pass in his hands, but his mind was somewhere else. Somewhere by the ocean. Somewhere in the warmth of Tanner's laughter. somewhere in the feeling of falling asleep next to someone who made him feel safe. His flight was boarding soon, but his chest felt tight, like his heart was trying to tell him something his mind refused to accept. This wasn't just about leaving, it was about running. Running from the one good thing that had been standing in front of him all along. His pulse thundered in his ears, and then, suddenly, he stood up. He turned and ran. Past the waiting area, past security, past everything except the feeling pulling him back toward the only place that had felt real since his life fell apart. Tanner had just sat down at his desk when his office door burst open. He barely had time to react before Leon was there, gripping his collar, yanking him forward, and kissing him. The force of it nearly knocked the air from Tanner's lungs. For a split second, shock froze him in place, and then he melted into it. Leon's hands fisted in his shirt, his breath ragged, his lips desperate and unrestrained, like he was pouring every ounce of fear, relief, and longing into that one kiss. Tanner caught him, steadied him. One hand curling around the back of Lion's neck, the other gripping his waist, anchoring them together. Lion broke away just enough to breathe, his forehead pressing against Tanner's. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his fingers still tangled in fabric as if afraid to let go. Tanner swallowed hard. I couldn't get on that plane, Leon whispered, his voice shaking. Tanner's breath caught. Leon exhaled sharply. I tried. I told myself it was the right thing, the safe thing, but the second I sat down, it felt wrong. His fingers curled tighter. I was running, Tanner. I was running from this, from you. Tanner's chest ached. Leon's gaze flickered over his face, vulnerable and raw. I don't know if I'm ready, he admitted. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. But when I thought about leaving, about never seeing you again, his voice broke. I couldn't do it. Tanner exhaled shakily, his grip tightening around Leon's waist. You don't have to be ready, Lion. Lion's breath stuttered. Tanner leaned in, pressing their foreheads together. You just have to be here. Leon let out a choked, almost disbelieving laugh. I am. And then Tanner kissed him. This time, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate. It was everything. Leon felt the weight of his grief lift piece by piece, replaced with something warmer, steadier. And for the first time in so long, he let himself believe. Because love didn't have to be painful. Sometimes, love was just this. A hand holding yours. A kiss that felt like home. And someone who never stopped choosing you. Epilogue. Home is where you are. The sun was just beginning to set as Leon stepped off the small ferry, the salty breeze wrapping around him like a familiar embrace. He exhaled slowly, his chest tight with anticipation and excitement, his fingers clutching the strap of his bag a little too tightly. This was it. After months of late-night calls, of airport goodbyes, and I miss yous whispered across time zones, after stolen weekends and weeks spent aching for each other, he was finally here. For good. The island was just as breathtaking as he remembered. Palm trees swaying lazily, the scent of the ocean thick in the air, the warmth of the sand stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The place that had once been just a temporary escape from his heartbreak was now his new home. And standing at the dock, waiting for him with that same easy, lopsided smile, was Tanner. Leon barely had time to react before Tanner closed the distance between them, wrapping him up in a firm, grounding embrace. Leon inhaled sharply, sinking into it. God, he had missed this. Missed the solid warmth of Tanner's arms around him. Missed the way Tanner fit against him so effortlessly, like he had always been meant to. Tanner pressed a kiss to his temple, murmuring, "Took you long enough." Leon huffed out a laugh, squeezing him tighter. "Shut up." Tanner chuckled, pulling back just enough to look at him, his hands still resting on Leon's waist. There was something different in his eyes now, something settled, content, whole. Leon could feel it in himself too. After months of longing, of waiting, of making things work despite the distance, he was finally standing here, where he wanted to be. With who he wanted to be with. "You ready?" Tanner asked, tilting his head toward the car parked near the dock. Leon smirked. "To officially start my new life here? With you?" He exhaled, shaking his head with a soft smile. "Yeah, I really am." Tanner grinned. Good, because I already stocked the kitchen with all your weird favorite snacks. Leon laughed, warmth bubbling in his chest. If you think bribing me with food is the way to my heart, you're absolutely right. Tanner rolled his eyes but tugged him forward anyway, lacing their fingers together as they walked toward the car. And as they drove away from the dock, the island stretching out before them, Leon realized something. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't looking back, because everything he had been searching for, everything he had thought he lost, was right here, waiting for him. And he was finally home.